Think Realty Nation, it's your host, Abhi Golhar. Welcome to the Think Realty podcast. Today we're talking about the build-to-rent market. And if you don't know what that is, you should stick around if you're a new investor. It's a really important strategy that my friend, Bruce McNeilage, has been talking about for quite a while, and he's a master of it. I've had him on the Think Realty radio show when we had the radio show, had him a bunch of times on this podcast. And if you don't know him yet, you're about to. He's the real estate ninja. That interview is to come. This episode is brought to you by the Think Realty Hybrid Conference and Expo in Houston, March 26th through March 27th. Set your sights on making 2021 a success with more knowledge and know-how by learning and networking with top-tier REI pros. For limited time, receive a buy one, get one deal on both live and virtual tickets. Register for 2 tickets and enter the code PODCAST at checkout to receive this special pricing. Again, that code is PODCAST. Visit thinkrealty.com/Houston for more information. Yeah, that's a 2-for-1 deal. That's a good deal. I should just keep buying these things. All right, anyway. So we're going to get to it. Bruce, welcome to the show. We have lots to talk about with the build-to-rent market strategies and especially what's happening in 2021. So do me a favor, intro yourself, and we'll get right to it.
Sure. I'm Bruce McNeilage. I'm the president and co-founder of Kinlock Partners. I started in the build-to-rent in 2005. Now we are doing full subdivisions of purpose-built rental houses, primarily in Nashville and also in Atlanta, and we are also active in and around the MSAs of South Carolina.
So back when was it, 4 years ago, you were a guest on the Think Realty radio show, and I remember having this conversation with you about build-to-rent. I'm like, man, this is a great idea. But it also seems really expensive to do. You need to make sure you have the right construction partners, the right cost of materials, the right infrastructure, the right go vertical strategy. And you had it all back then. And now your people look to you for the sage advice for this particular strategy. For the new investors that are just listening to this and they're like, well, I've heard about the BRRRR strategy. I've heard about single family rentals, new construction. How exactly does build-to-rent fit, or should build-to-rent fit into their investing portfolio and strategy?
I think for a small investor, where I would start with build-to-rent is maybe building 2 or 3 or 5 houses, infill houses, in a city that you're in. What's nice about that is it's a small build. You can get a loan from the bank relatively easy. I would do that, rent them out, keep them for myself, or if there was interest from a fund, an institutional buyer, that's certainly an out that you can have. But I think, again, for a small investor, I would do a small construction loan, do a few of them. And I think you'll find that the build-to-rent houses are very sought after by tenants. And you really have a competitive advantage because you have a brand new house versus maybe renting something 20 or 30 years old.
So let's talk to the pro investor now. And there was a recent article on DS News titled "The Booming Build for Rent Industry." It had a couple statistics which I will read off. Quote, data from CoreLogic's 2018 SFR Single Family Rental Report indicates that its single family rental index increased 4.1% since January 2018, noting that low rental home inventory relative to demand is fueling the growth of single family rent prices. That's really interesting. And especially in Atlanta, I've been driving around these builders building these townhome communities, and they will build, sell, and they'll keep a street of them as rentals. And I think that's a really interesting strategy, right? It subsidizes potential future cash flow, potential future activity. What's the play there? Is it to do more of these, and how are you capitalizing on this trend?
I think for a home builder, a local, regional, not even national home builders, the play is it's a guaranteed out. You take a construction loan, you don't have to worry about a model or paying commissions. And again, you're guaranteed to make a sale and close that loan out probably within 4 or 5 days of the house being finished. So I think it's much safer for a builder to do a build to rent and sell it to an institution. Conversely, if they wanted to do it for themselves, again, they don't have to worry about selling it, about paying commissions. It's sitting around. They're creating their own product, and that product, they're going to have a basis lower than if they bought the product, because again, they bought the lot and they built it themselves. So they are providing and creating that rental property really probably at the lowest price they could versus having to buy it.
Where did you see the trend going in 2020 last year, and where do you think it's going to be this year? Is there a big difference, and is that difference a positive one, or is it a negative one?
I think, gosh, between 19 and 20 and 20 and 21, this thing is just exploding. A couple of years ago, the majors were not involved in it. Now the majors are putting $1 billion or $2 million in it. There's a land rush. It's tougher for me to get land. And I don't see it ending because people with COVID, they're moving out of the urban core. They want a house in the suburbs. Maybe they're not prepared to buy one. That's why they were renting in the urban core currently. And there's just going to be a rush. And right now, I'm 100% leased in 3 states. As fast as we can build them, they rent out. And we're even renting them while the house is under construction. And then all of the majors have an interest in buying our assets, primarily because we're in 2 areas that either they want to be in, like Nashville, or they're currently in, like Atlanta. So I don't see this thing slowing down. I only see it speeding up. The problem is land and the cost of materials. That's really what's kind of hurting anybody from getting in, or their profit margins are getting squeezed just because the pro formas aren't coming true because of materials, labor, and the cost of the land.
So let's talk about 2 of those challenges that you mentioned. The first being the inventory. It's hard to find land. And the second being the cost of materials. How are you solving for the second? And then we'll go for the first. How are you solving the problem of the cost of materials being so high? Are you going to different suppliers? It's hard to visit different countries right now, but are you trying to source your materials direct from supplier overseas? How are you doing that?
Well, we're locked in for 30 or 60 days on the cost of the material. So if things go up, I'm good for 30 days. Now, the problem is those numbers, like lumber numbers going up, I've got to do something, or it's got to come back down in 30 days, or it's going to affect me. I think what you do right now is you pad your pro forma and add maybe $5,000 or $10,000 on each house, so you can buffer yourself a little bit from those increases. But I don't see things coming down. Shingles, concrete, things like that, labor, drywall. Those prices aren't going to come down because there's so much demand, so few labor, and quite frankly, the materials aren't going to go down when you have that much demand. And so I think that's going to hurt builders long term. Their profits and margins may get squeezed. Conversely, if they want to keep the same margins, they're going to have to increase the price of the house, which is going to be passed on to the tenant because they've got to get that much more in rent to hit their numbers.
So, okay. What then is the premium that a builder should add for a tenant for a build-to-rent home? Should it be an extra couple $100 on top just to subsidize the increase in materials and labor cost?
I mean, I would say for a $250,000 house, an entry, or one step above an entry level house, like most of us are doing, I would probably say $10,000. The lumber package alone will be eaten up by that. We haven't been able to get windows. Sometimes we just can't get windows. We've run around trying to get a refrigerator or stove. Those have been in short supply. So all of it has been very difficult. And they say lumber's going to go back down again and things like that. It may go down, but it might go down only halfway. So again, with all the demand of materials, I've got a pad at least by $10,000.
So let's go to the first solve. So we talked about the second solve, right? Which is the cost of materials. And that's a really big concern, not only for you, but also for builders nationwide. And especially flippers too, right? Like everybody that uses materials is being affected. The first issue that we talked about that you brought up was the issue of inventory. There's just not enough land. How do you solve for that? Is it creating some kind of algorithm, some kind of software, right, that scours the MLS or that scours these off-market listings to find land to buy? How are you doing with that?
Well, I think obviously they're not making any more land, right?
Right.
And so I think taking farmland or land that is currently zoned other than residential the name of the game there is to buy the land, get it under contract, take it through the entitlements, and try to get it set up and approved for maximum density. That's where you're going to create values. If you can get land that maybe people didn't know about, or maybe you had a back pocket or hip pocket listing from an agent and you're able to find it, you tie it up, but it might take 6 to 9 months to go through the entitlement process. But you have to have those deals in the hopper, because every time you do one of those deals, you're going to run out of that 6 months, 9 months, a year in the future. So you want to stay about 2 years ahead if you can get the land tied up, and then you have to take it to the entitlement process. Now, not every piece of land is going to make it through the entitlement process. Once they find out you're building rental houses, some people think that's negative, but it's just scouring the market and trying to find off-market deals that you can get entitled and zoned for the high-density single-family residential housing that you're going to build.
So let's take Atlanta, for example, just thinking down that train of thought for a second. How far away would you look for land from Atlanta? Let's say maybe north, south, east, west. Maybe you're going west on 20, east on 20, or north on the 75-85, south on 75-85. How far should we be looking to put land under contract to then start down the entitlement process?
I say, I think Atlanta's 18 cities now, 18 counties, excuse me. I would go as north as Kennesaw, or just north as Kennesaw, as far south as McDonough. As far west, I really wouldn't go too many exits past Douglasville. And as far as east, I would go out to Hall County, that direction, maybe Grayson, past Beaufort, a few exits, etc. We're out in Jackson County, just past Brazelton. But you do have to go farther and farther outside the urban core to get land cheap enough. But people are not going to be commuting to the urban core like they used to. Yeah. We're trying to get close to the 285 loop, the loop around the city. And if you've got a 20-minute or 30-minute drive to that loop, remember, you're going to be telecommuting. You're going to be working out of your house more. You've got to be close to an airport, but possibly not flying as much. So we're going farther outside the urban core. I'd say 45 minutes, maybe 45 miles outside of the urban core to look for property to build houses on.
Okay. So 2 follow-up questions. You answered one of them. How far are commuters, are home owners / home renters, how far would they be willing to drive? And I think you answered that question, right? The 45 miles and or about 30 minutes. And so if I don't live in Atlanta, I'm watching this, take a look at your primary market. And what Bruce is suggesting is drive time maybe 30 minutes in either direction, north, south, east, west, and start looking for land in those areas, and then make sure you connect with Bruce and sell him your property, because he's looking for it. Let's just be honest. I know he's smiling.
I've got the cash, and I'm ready to go, man. I can't find any deals right now.
So there you go. So here's his personal cell phone number. I'm totally kidding. Don't do that. But I'm sure we'll get his contact information in a second. The other thing too is if you have a bunch of these homeowners that are like, hey, I want to go 45 minutes, 30 minutes out, and you are telecommuting, that's where the state of the market is now, right? That's where we're going to be in 2021. The follow-up question that I have for this is, we're seeing this push away from the urban core as you talk about. How long will it be before those folks that have moved from urban core to suburbia, you're 35, 40 miles away, how long will it be before they start itching to come back to the urban core?
Never.
Really? You think it's going to be never?
I will tell you, I see a lot of people retiring, 60, 65 years old. Their kids are out of school. They don't need to be in the good schools out in the suburbs. They don't need to have all the shopping, all the recreation, because their kids are gone. We're seeing 60, 65-year-olds move back to the city because they want to be near arts, be near kind of the vibe of the city. Because remember, they've been gone for so long from it. Yeah. So I'm seeing some people as they retire move back into the city, but you're not going to have folks with kids that are looking for schools and parks and recreation, soccer fields, all that. You're not going to see those people going back. They'll only go back after the kids leave home to go to school.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. you take a look at the property taxes, the average dollar a square foot that homeowners in Fulton County will pay in property taxes, it's insane. Well, let's take
Yeah.
Georgia, for example. The entire state of Georgia, you're paying about $30 a square foot in property taxes. It's a lot of money in property taxes. Now, granted, a lot of that is concentrated Fulton County, Gwinnett County, et cetera, right? Like DeKalb County. And so in Fulton County and Buckhead, that number starts to really skyrocket. And it doesn't make any sense if you're paying 14, 15, 16, upwards of $20,000 a year in property taxes. I'd rather go shoot myself, right? Like, okay, maybe not that.
Yeah, me too.
But you know, you know what I mean? It's just obnoxious. So I can see what you're saying, right? People want to move out. They want a lower cost of living. They are telecommuting more. It is the new normal. And I don't really see that changing. There are a lot of folks that last year, they're like, yeah, this COVID thing, it's going to just be 2 or 3 weeks and we'll be back to normal. Yeah, right. I mean, now we're looking at later this year, maybe. So, and it's an interesting trend for sure. So you are saying it's not, we're not going to see a massive exodus out of the suburbs and moving back to the urban core, and that's going to be here for, I mean, that trend is not happening.
Well, the millennials also too are getting older. They're now in their early 30s. They're going to start having kids.
Yeah.
And again, they're going to want the soccer fields, the good schools, all the different amenities that a suburb can offer that you just don't have in the inner city. I mean, if my dog wants to run around with my child on soccer fields, where do you do that in Midtown Atlanta? Where do you do that in down? Where do you do it in Buckhead? You can't. And so now that the millennials are an age where they're going to start having kids, I think COVID is just kind of accelerating that, or just creating another reason to go out. And some people won't even be working in office buildings at all. So being close to that office is not going to be as important.
That's, yeah. I'd rather, listen, I would rather see a home that's semi-built, that has a studio semi-built in. You know, you've got your little like soft light, you have your camera set up, and that's what you need. That's all you need. What else do you need? Nothing. You're still more productive at home than you would be going into an office anyway. All right.
Yeah.
So build for rent, Bruce, you're going to be on the panel, the state of the market, the state of the build for rent market panel in Houston from March 26th, 27th. So you definitely want to check him out there, shake his hand, frankly, go make some money, right? Like he said right now, he's got cash and he needs to buy. Give us a little insight into maybe some of the points you'll talk about on that panel, and then we'll wrap up the interview.
Yeah, I'm just really going to talk about, primarily for the small and mid-size investor. We'll talk about the big boys, but I'm going to talk about how to get in, how I got in, some tips. Maybe I want people to learn from my mistakes. You know, that's the cheapest tuition that you can pay, is learning from other mistakes. And I've been successful, but I haven't gotten there by avoiding mistakes. Now, the good news is there wasn't build to rent when I got in the business. And so I couldn't learn from anybody. There was no case study. There was no research. And so I think now it's going to be easier, but it's tougher to find the deals. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to talk about houses, the bedrooms, bathrooms, how you have to design a house that renters are looking for today. Because at the end of the day, you're not living in the house. So you might say, gosh, I love this color, or I love how these bedrooms, or look at where the kitchen is. It's in the middle of the house. It doesn't make a difference what you like about a house. You've got to design and put the finishes and put the fixtures in that the tenant's going to want. And a lot of times those are different. So I'm going to be talking about all those things. And again, I'll be free after the panel discussion or during it to answer any questions. And usually I stick around for an hour, sit in the back of the, stand in the back of the room, trade cards. And a lot of people have followed up after these things a few weeks later, and I've been able to help them. And every once in a while you do a deal because somebody's got something that might be available that you're interested in.
Perfect. And one last question. Are you looking for only the 3 markets that you're investing in? If so, what are they? What are those 3 markets? Or are you looking for additional cities that you're starting to expand to?
So primarily, again, we work in Nashville, Atlanta, and Columbia, in Greenville, South Carolina. I have an interest in getting into Dallas and into Texas. I'm also, I've tried to crack the Raleigh and Charlotte market, and I just haven't been successful. So I would say primarily those new cities, and then going deep and wide in the cities that I'm already in.
Nice. Yeah, I would be influenced by the Cowboys also. That's exactly the only reason why I would go to Dallas. Totally kidding. But Bruce, I'm looking forward to seeing you in Houston. It's going to be a really good conversation. I'll be sticking around to pick your brain a little later too. What's the best way to reach you? Website, phone number, email, potentially?
Yeah, website is kinlochpartners.net. It's KINLOCH partners.net. There's a lot of good information, videos, things I've been in the news for. You can see what our houses look like, take a tour, 3D tour of our different models. And then also my email address is on there. It's just bruce@kinlochpartners.net. More than happy to spend time with any of your listeners or people that subscribe to your magazine. Because again, people helped me. And I kind of stood on the shoulders of others that were older and more successful. And I believe it's my job to help people be successful. And I'm happy to do so.
Bingo. Bruce, thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it, man. It was fun.
Sure. Always a pleasure.
All right. See you later. See you in Houston. Think Realty Nation. So our next segment, it is brought to you by Norada Real Estate Investments, your premier source for cash flow investment property. Visit www.noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com. So a lot of really good information from Bruce. I mean, you take a look at a strategy that you should be implementing in your business that could offer some cash flow if you do it right. Just make sure, as he mentioned, there are two things, right? The number one is the inventory, making sure you have the deal. Number two, you need the cost of materials to start to go down a little bit. So make sure that you have your suppliers all lined up. So for this segment, let's talk about the 3 steps for renewing a lease while raising rent. There are really 3 steps here. Well, of course, it's in the article title. Duh. Written by Martin Scott. Martin, sorry, man. 3 steps he talks about. Number 1, make rent increases an aspect of your lease. Problem number 1 is that. It's that simple. Yes, rent is going to increase from year to year. If you don't tell your tenant that, but you're thinking that, guess what? You can't raise your rent. So make sure that your tenant also knows that rent can increase, and how much rent should be increased should also be potentially dictated in that lease agreement, which is step number 2. Determine how much you should increase rent. Now, if you're starting out at a lower number, because maybe you picked up a distressed property or you picked up a property with a tenant already in it, and you are looking to transition that tenant out, or the tenant is looking at leaving and then increasing the rent later, you got to run your comps. Just like if you're fixing and flipping property, you want to make sure that you put the right rental number in there so it gets rented right away. You don't want your property to be sitting a month or 2 or 3 or 4 later and it continue to be vacant for that long. You're losing money. Step number 3, notify your tenant. The moment that you understand, if you have a tenant in place and it's tenant occupied, the moment that you have a rental number in mind and you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to charge this tenant $950 instead of $825. Guess what? You got to notify that tenant. The sooner, the better, so that he or she or they have the ability to make that transition and say, you know what? Maybe I do want to stay in this property or maybe not. So those are the 3 steps. You want to check out this article, visit thinkrealty.com under investing strategies. That's the category, investing strategies, and definitely check it out. That's the show for today. Got any questions? Get in touch. Go to thinkrealty.com. You can find me anywhere online at Abi Golhar. And I'll tell you something. I'm excited to be in Houston. I haven't been in Houston since the last time I was in Houston, and that was the last time I was in Houston. Yeah, if you can figure that out, and let me know what I just said. It makes more sense if you don't think about it. This episode is brought to you by the Think Realty Hybrid Conference and Expo in Houston, March 26th through March 27th. Set your sights on making 2021 a success with more knowledge and know-how by learning and networking with top-tier real estate investment pros. For a limited time, get a buy one, get one deal on both the live and virtual tickets. Register for these 2 tickets and enter the code PODCAST at checkout to receive this special pricing. Visit thinkrealty.com/Houston for more information. That's a wrap. Until next time, happy investing.